Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I am Megan. I work here at Mid-Continent Public Library on our Square One Small Business Services team. We are thrilled to have back in our Food Ed studio our good friend Xander.
A pleasure always to join y'all.
Yeah. We are going to learn everything about getting your food product on a store shelf tonight with Xander. Thanks for joining us. Couple of quick housekeeping items. Please do take a quick second in the comments. Let us know who you are, if you are in business, what kind of business you have, what your food product is. Also, if you had registered on our library website, I have emailed out ahead of time several handouts that Xander will reference during the class. If you didn't get those, I will drop in the comments my email. Shoot me an email and I will send those right over to you. Also in that chat, any questions you have throughout the class, feel free to drop those in there. I will be monitoring those and I can flash them up on the screen and make sure Xander sees whatever you're typing. So don't be shy. Give us your questions. You're here, your time. We want to make sure you get the information you need. And lastly, at the end, I will post a link to a short survey that helps us keep doing this program. It is grant funded and it's a way for us to let the grant folks know that we're doing what we said we would do. So that will come at the end. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your attention. Thanks, Xander, for being here. I'm going to kick it over to you.
All right, Megan, and thank you, and thank Mid-Continent Public Library and the Kauffman Foundation for making this possible and letting me, connect with all the folks out there in Facebook and YouTube world and talk about, starting your own food product business. So let's just jump on into it. So we're going over, like Megan said, what I want to know as I'm kind of going over the introductory stuff. If you've got a chance, if you're just tuning in, please in the chat, let us know who you are. Tell us what food product you have. Something with food product businesses. Every food product type has its own specific considerations. Each food product is regulated a little bit differently. So if I know what food products the audience is thinking about, I can give more specific examples, or I can go into a little bit more detail if you're canning a salsa, if you're making beef jerky, if it's baked goods. All those have their own little specific special considerations that I definitely want to go over if there's folks in the audience that are considering or have developed those products. And another thing, like Megan was saying, I want to make sure that I'm providing the information that you came here to get. So tell me specifically if there is a piece of information that you came here, or rather joining us online specifically for. Let me know in the chat so I can make sure to either A, give you that answer, or if it's something that I don't know, I'll be able to, after the class, get that information and send it your way. So as we're getting all started up, make sure to post those products and questions. All right, let's go over I'm giving you the 10 steps right off the bat that we'll be going over right now, just to kind of set the stage and kind of go, and I try to stay in order. So you might have a question right now about, marketing, and I might just say it's step 9. We'll get there. It's on the list, but just kind of set the expectations for this evening. Here's the 10 steps right now. We'll be going over all the details of those. So the first and one of the most important things to really consider with your food product is, what is this product's market potential? And this really gets into the question of what's the value proposition? What is the reason that people will spend money on your product versus whatever other product that they might be considering on that store shelf? And I'll tell you right now, one answer that's you probably want to give some more thought to, and we get it all the time, is mine's the best X, Y, or Z. Mine's the best salsa. Mine's the best barbecue sauce. It's just the best. That is really for your customers to decide. So that is not a very strong value proposition. You'll want to, in addition, because if you're going out of your way to start a food business and launch a food product and you're putting in all the effort and money that it takes to do so, of course, you think that yours is the best, but ultimately it's for your customers to decide. So you need to think about the value proposition, how you're selling that, how you get them to try your product for them to then decide, yep, this one's the best. I love it. I'm a brand fan. I'm coming back to the store to get this particular product. So really be thinking about what is making your product different, what's going through, why is your customer deciding to even buy this product in the first place. So one product that's kind of and at least in Kansas City, and I'm sure there's somebody in the audience right now, if you're thinking, hey, I've got the best barbecue sauce. It's kind of my punching bag product because there's so much competition in Kansas City. If we were in the Northeast, if we were some other part of the country, it's a different story. But in Kansas City, there's lots of barbecue sauce options. So you really need to think through, is this meeting a particular dietary restriction? Is this something that is using ingredients that other barbecue sauces are not using? A product that I've worked with, a blueberry barbecue sauce. That's different. That's distinguishable from the other products. Right off the bat, looking at it on the shelf, you're like, blueberry? Or some of those like white barbecue sauces, that's different. So there could be health, maybe even environmental considerations, that it's sustainable, it's local, but there's something to it to distinguish that product. So you've got that value proposition to convince folks like, ooh, I should, because most likely anybody in Kansas City, you've got a go-to barbecue sauce. Like there's one that you know is on the shelf. You're like, okay, I know I like this one. So you really need to be thinking about right off the bat, what is different, what is unique, what is, my product is the only one that is this. So really, I can't stress enough, give that a lot of thought because that's going to inform your marketing. It's going to inform your business strategy. It's going to be key to growing a successful food business once we go through those basic steps of just getting you there on the store shelf. Now, let's do a little bit of research on your competitors. This is just going to be important to make some more decisions about kind of your price point, maybe where your value proposition is going to differ from your competitors, and also consider not just your direct competition, but also your indirect competition. So I get this one a lot where folks will say, well, there's just no competition. Mine is an absolutely unique product. There's no other product quite like it. All right, look at other products in that category. So if you are the only one that's got the elderberry currant jam, there's no other elderberry currant jam, you're still competing, indirectly with other preserves, fruit spreads, jams, jellies. So that would be the products that I would be looking at to kind of see, why do people buy these? The customers that buy these products, what are they interested in? What's the price point? How are these products marketing themselves? This, again, is going to help you define your own business plan on what already works in this sector with this particular food product, and how you might differentiate yourself, how you'll be different, how you'll carve out a part of that market and carve out some of those customers to then be frequent purchasers of your food product. Early on, you'll want to find ways, because you can't go out necessarily with a lot of food products and just start sampling to the general public. You'll have to meet certain certain regulatory considerations that we'll be going over here in just a little bit. But yeah, you can't just set up a booth necessarily at the farmer's market yet, just in this early stage. But you can absolutely start sampling with your friends and with your family. So one tip that I give to some of the businesses that I work with is devise a way to get constructive feedback. Because here's the deal. If you go and say, like, this is my bread that I bake, and you go to your friends and family and acquaintances that you know, and you say, hey, try my bread and tell me what you think. Well, especially in Kansas City, they're going to be nice. They're going to be Kansas City nice. They're going to say some variation of, this is good, and your dream of starting this business will be successful, and I believe in you. Which is awesome. You need supporters. But that's not necessarily getting you useful market research or useful constructive criticism. So what I advise is, if you've got different variations of a formula for your food product that you're considering, maybe one's got a different type of salt, or maybe one you bake in a different way, come up with, 4 or 5 different variations of your particular product, and then have your friends tell you what they like or dislike about the different versions. That gives them a safe out to say, hey, number 3 is my favorite for these reasons, but these other ones have faults, and they can start to give you some of that constructive feedback because they've got an out that they can say, this one's awesome, and I like it for these reasons, and there's some comparison why they like that one. Somebody just saying, it's great, and I like it, not useful. But when they say, well, compared to this one, that now you've got some, data that you can work with on your formulation and on your product, and start getting that information on why they like that one. And sometimes I even suggest, like, of the 4 or 5, make one that's just objectively bad, just to see if they're, like, being too nice. Like, just make one that they should say, and number 5 is awful, just to kind of gauge where they're at on how Kansas City nice that they're being on that. But either way, try to figure out a way to get constructive feedback, because just going to your friends and family and saying, hey, try my thing, tell me what you think, they're going to say, this is good. But I guess I'm making some assumptions about your friends and family. Maybe it's different. But in a lot of cases, you'll get less than helpful feedback there. And then the other thing is, this is your baby. I get it. This is a recipe that maybe is passed down through your family. This is something that you have spent hours and hours of time putting together. But at the end of the day, like any business, it's not about you. It's about the people who are spending money on your particular product. You launching this business really is about what the customers, what your future customers are going to want and going to want to spend money on. So you're going to have to check your ego just a little bit. If it's a product that you really, really enjoy and you can make it, that you enjoy it, that's awesome. But if you're going to turn it into a business, it needs to be a product that you like and enjoy and love, but also that there's enough other people who like and enjoy and love it and will spend the amount of money that is necessary to make it into a profitable business. So again, check that ego as you're taking on that feedback and evaluating, does this product have market potential? One of the first things that we work with our businesses on, and maybe it's not the final price point because there's still some information that will need to be gathered as we're developing this business plan. But I like to start early on in the process by looking at your prospective price point, your retail price, your suggested retail price, and your initial costs of what it's costing you to put together that product. And we want to kind of gauge for the future. And the reason we do this is we noticed over time, some of our businesses were having trouble, 1, 2, 3 years down the road with their price point because they didn't price for all the particular components that they needed to early on. And now they're having trouble fitting that component into their price point. So what I mean by this, let's take an example. So I've got here that first point on your retail price. It's obviously the cost of goods, of the ingredients and the label and the packaging. Obviously, if you're getting into stores, the stores have a particular markup. But one that gets forgotten a lot of times is the distribution costs and how much it really costs to pay for a truck, to pay for a person in a vehicle and vehicle maintenance and fuel to get your product from where you are making it to the actual store. And maybe early on, we'll talk about this in the logistics section. Maybe you're just doing that by yourself and you're like, it's my car and it's my time. I'm not paying myself. I don't need to consider that. It's all free. But later on, you will have to pay somebody. You'll have to pay a company. You'll have to pay employees. So if you, found, it costs me $1 to make this particular product, and if I sell it for $2, all right, I've got a really good markup there, but you're not considering the store and the amount that they'll want, the distribution costs. And it's very difficult later on when you have to incorporate those things to jump your price point up to $3 or $4 on that product when your customers are used to getting it for $2. So you don't want to set yourself up for that pricing challenge somewhere down the line. So very early on in the process, you really want to start figuring out what these things are going to cost and build yourself in enough margin to incorporate that later down the road. And then so Megan had mentioned some handouts. So if you are joining us and you have not yet gotten those handouts, make sure, put in a message to get those, because one that we're going to look at is the Doing the Math worksheet that I've put together. And it just kind of maps out what I'm talking about right now on figuring out, hey, all of those costs and what kind of margins to expect a store would want, what kind of percentage that you might need to allocate to distribution, and then just some very general categories of figuring out like what are all the startup costs, what are all the operational costs that I'm going to have. And now you've got a decent idea of what your profit per unit is going to be, because we kind of looked at, okay, here's my cost, my recommended retail, what my wholesale price is going to be. You can start doing some initial just concept stage formulations on how many units would you have to sell to even break even. Like that's what we want to look at to kind of prove the financial feasibility of launching this food product. We have seen it. It sometimes happens where you do the math and you figure I'd have to sell, 20,000 units to cover all the costs of equipment and a kitchen and of, getting the pre-printed, packages and all the other components of it. And is it reasonable? Do I expect that, say I'm looking at the Kansas City market, if I'm in, 60 stores, you're doing the math kind of backwards, can I sell 20,000 units to even get to the break-even point? Or is that reasonable to expect? And you can start to make some changes early on so you don't look back after 2 or 3 years in operation and you're like, boy, I'm not making a lot of money. Or worst case, boy, I'm actually just losing money doing this. Do this math ahead of time so you can make changes. Maybe you do need to look at your cost of goods and realize, hey, the ingredients that I've picked out originally are just, it's too expensive. When I start adding the markup throughout the supply chain, there's no way to be able to make a profit and kind of stay within a reasonable retail price that customers will accept, and we'll get a lot of customers paying that amount. So here it's very easy to make changes, to go back through and adjust, and maybe this is a common one where we find like some really nice packaging. Like that is the dream packaging. It sings on the shelf. It's like, but that packaging costs 10 times more than the standard blister pouch and label that you would normally use. As much as it looks great, it's just not financially feasible. So you want to be able to make all these decisions early on, as early as possible, so you can set yourself up for success. So yeah, just kind of talking about, I like to do early on the kind of hypothetical, what's our break even? Like what sales volume gets this business to actually starting to make a profit and paying back all the, and honestly, food businesses are fairly capital intensive. You've got, specific equipment, you've got a facility, you've got minimums when you are buying packaging or ingredients, or you're going through a contract manufacturer. There's going to be minimums that all add up to an industry that's pretty capital intensive. So you really want to know before you start dropping the dollars on this, what is that break even mark? What am I trying to get to? And then beyond, to have a successful and profitable business. All right, switching gears just a little bit, we're going to do some regulatory overview, which is the lamest title of a section. It inspires so much excitement. So I'm gonna work on this. I'm gonna try and make the food regulation portion of this a little more fun. Just like any business, you're gonna start off with your general state, local business permits. You're setting up an entity with the Secretary of State. You're getting your general business permits. Definitely connect with your city hall, and kind of figure out what you're going to need where you're at. With food products in particular, you've got a couple of acronyms. You've got the FDA and you've got the USDA. For FDA, most of our food products, most of the folks that we work with, they're falling under the FDA. The USDA is generally your terrestrial land meats. So like we use the example of beef jerky. So that's one that's going to fall under the USDA as opposed to the FDA. But the majority of your salsas, and actually, I'm looking through some of the comments. So chicken lasagna, that would be one that would actually fall under both, because your lasagna is going to have those non-meat ingredients. The USDA is going to be for the chicken. So that's going to be one of those products that considers both. And I'm looking through some of our other any other examples that I see here in the chat. Chicken and egg situation. Oh, okay. So there's a few questions that I've kind of jumped over here. Okay. So we got a question here. We're stuck in a chicken and egg situation. At first I read that and I was like, a chicken and egg product. So yeah, no. Do we source CoPackers before we pitch retailers, or the other way around? Great question. If you're going to need a CoPacker, that comes first. I do not recommend that you start pitching your product to retail stores before you are ready to take an order. In most cases, when you connect with that store manager, department manager, procurement officer for whatever company that it is, we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to the getting into stores section, no, one of your absolute first steps is figuring out how you make the thing. So yeah, and in some cases, you'll actually, I've seen businesses that will be sitting on the inventory itself. So you've got the co-packer, or you've figured out, how you're manufacturing this particular food product. You've got it. It's in a warehouse somewhere, and then that's when you start talking to the stores, because potentially they'll make a decision right there. In my experience, most retail stores, when they're ready to make a decision, they do so fairly quickly. I'll be honest with you. If you've talked to a retail store and they say, "Oh, we might be interested, we'll let you know," and you don't hear back pretty soon, that's a no. It's probably a no. Most of the time, that whoever's making that decision on what product to take in, they're making that decision pretty quickly. So in this case, the thing that comes first is the co-packer, or figuring out manufacturing. And actually, I believe one of the next sections on here is, figuring out that particular facility as part of the regulatory overview. So yeah, you're going to have those food specific, permits, testing, requirements. Like, for example, going back with like chicken lasagna. All right, you're under USDA with the chicken there. You'll be required early on to have something called a HACCP plan. With those handouts that you got, there is a glossary of terms that you can look back and say, what was Xander talking about with this HACCP plan? But basically, it's a document that goes over all the steps in the critical control points and how you are operating and how you're maintaining safe manufacturing practices, all written out in a document. So that's going to be something specific required early on for that product, though most food products eventually will be required to have that particular HACCP plan, that particular document available. I'm just taking a second to look through, because we had some pop up here. Some other food products. I see we've got a catering company joining us. There will be a bit of overlap for food products and for catering. But I would encourage, for the folks that are doing catering, I do another class on starting a restaurant that might be even more applicable. So we'd love you to join the next one that we have that available. I saw two that we've got, granola. So that's going to be a particular product that doesn't have too many extra regulations, no testing requirements, nothing, it's not a terribly potentially hazardous food product, as opposed to when you're talking about working with like raw meats, working with raw poultry in particular. That's going to be a food product that's a bit more regulated. So one thing we want to send to our USDA folks, I've got some more specific information in a handout for small USDA businesses that will have some more specific information on that one. And then just wanting to make sure that there's nobody else, no other food products that I want to specifically go over here. And if you're catching this a little bit later and you haven't posted what food product that you are planning on making or making now, go ahead and throw that in there, and I can make sure that we get some more specific information for those products. All right. Then we're going to go over labeling in particular here, and that's going to be another handout that I've given to you all to be able to reference. And then let's also talk about a little bit insurance. I mean, you're getting started. Almost every business is going to have just general liability. Food product manufacturers very likely are going to be required to have workers' comp. In some cases, like Missouri, it depends on your total employment. Some cases, it depends on the industry, manufacturer. there's working in a manufacturing or a kitchen facility is inherently a little bit dangerous. So it may be recommended that you get that type of insurance early on in the process. I also point out product liability because it doesn't necessarily overlap with general liability. You would potentially be getting a separate policy or separate type of insurance specifically around the liability of your product making somebody sick. So it's important to have a conversation with whoever you're getting your insurance from and making sure and going over what does this cover, what does this not cover, because we've seen examples where folks they get their general liability and they assume, hey, this covers all the things where I might get sued. Not really. There are a variety of different insurance products, so that's why it's important to find an agent that is familiar with food. That's going to be very helpful throughout the process of selecting what insurance, what levels, what things to consider, what riders that you might have included in that policy. It helps you out because they've worked with food before. You can work with your agent that you get your personal home auto policy through. They could probably find a carrier and put together a policy for you, but they may not be the most helpful person to be the agent for your business insurance. So my number one recommendation on insurance, find an agent that is familiar with food. And then two, knock on wood, if you get into a situation where you do have to make a claim, it also makes that process a little bit easier. And then second is having that conversation and knowing, what is covered, what is not, what may need to be covered in the future as you scale, as you grow the business, and as you take on, different levels of liability with that company. So definitely don't just forget, sign up for the insurance. Oh, I had to get it, and I set it over here, and I don't think about it. It's one of those things that you want to review and have an agent that you can sit down and talk with to figure out what you need to have and what is going to make sense for your business. All right, next bit here. Where the magic happens in the manufacturing facility, where you're going to make your products. And we were talking about this a little bit earlier with that question there. The vast majority of food businesses are going to need a commercial licensable facility. You may have heard that there are some options with cottage food law for specific products like baked goods, spice blends, really non-potentially hazardous products that you could make from home and sell direct to the consumer. But the name of this class is getting your food product into stores, and that is one of those categories that does not fit under cottage food law. You cannot wholesale. You cannot make a product at your house and then sell it to a third party that then sells it to the end consumer. So that's one of those categories that's going to jump you. And also selling across state lines is one of those categories too, where you're going to end up under the jurisdiction of the FDA, the USDA, and you're going to need that commercial licensable facility. Wherever you're looking, whether if it's a shared facility, if it's somebody else's facility, if it's somebody's restaurant who that you'll want to be making the product there at 2 a.m. when they're not running the restaurant, whatever it may be. Early on in the process, I encourage you to get into contact with your local health agency. Get into contact with whoever would be your local FDA inspector, USDA inspector, to ensure that either that facility is already meeting the requirements for all of the above, of the FDA, of the local health department, if it's applicable, of whatever regulatory agencies that you could fit under, that facility is either A, already going to work out for you, or B, can be modified or changed or whatever you need to do to make it, meet all of the requirements for those agencies. What you don't want is to be rocking and rolling for 2 years, have that FDA inspector stop by and say, hey, the X, Y, and Z aren't going to work out. You want to have that all figured out and smooth over and know that you're meeting all those requirements from day one, so you're not going to have any particular interruptions in the middle of operating your business. That's where it becomes really difficult and becomes a major threat, that if you do have some inspection later on, if something doesn't work out, you get pulled from store shelves, or you have an interruption in your manufacturing and distribution process. That becomes really difficult to make up for while you're in operation. So I always encourage our folks, get this all started early on before you start spending money, putting in equipment, signing a long-term lease to a facility or whatever it may be. You can just go ask questions. Most of the time, health inspectors, FDA inspectors, most of my experience, they've been very, very helpful. They want to help you get going, and they want to make sure that products are manufactured in a safe way. So they want to actively work with you to get you to the point that you're manufacturing that product with accordance to all the health guidelines and safely for your customers. So definitely ask those questions. And then too, like we were talking about before, maybe early on, you're starting off with a co-packer. So a co-packer is just a contract manufacturer for food products. Depending on what product you have, will determine how difficult or easy it is to find options. But basically, it's just somebody out there. Typically, it's another food manufacturer who has invested in all the equipment to make, if it's granola or if it's salsa or whatever product it is. They have all the equipment and the weigh fill machines, basically machines that like dump and weigh and seal up the individual units. They've invested in all of that. But most manufacturers are not running that equipment 24/7. Maybe they're running it 2 days a week, and for the rest of the time, it's just kind of hanging out there. So they think, I might as well get the most out of my money for this stuff. Who else can I make their product for them? That's what we see with a lot of co-packers. So just kind of figuring out who's out there. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a company that is advertising themselves as a, quote, co-packer. In a lot of cases, we just see it is another snack food manufacturer. Maybe it's somebody that's doing pretzels, but the equipment can be used also for granola. So although pretzel company is not out there like advertising like, hey, co-packer for snack foods, you've met pretzel folks or you've met whatever other company and you're like, hey, you've got that facility. It's not uncommon to just start that conversation that way. We see a lot of our food businesses that go and find a contract manufacturer, find a co-packer, but it was just another manufacturing company that happened to have the equipment that they would need, and they're just not using it to its fullest capacity. They're not using those employees or getting them as many hours as they otherwise would. So having those, other products to manufacture in that facility just makes a lot of financial sense for that capital investment that they put in and for the folks that they've hired. So don't limit yourself. If you, Google search or use the library, Macon Public Library subscribes to a lot of industry reports that are accessible to you for the low cost of free. You could run those industry reports and you're like, I haven't found a co-packer for, making lasagna. Probably wouldn't find it just listed that way, but maybe there is a facility that is manufacturing, frozen meals that has all of the capacity to do so. So you could run that report on frozen meal manufacturers or just USDA plants that have met USDA standards already, and say, hey, I've got this product. Is that something that you would be interested in co-packing for us? And that might be how you would find that contract manufacturer. Finding the right co-packer it takes a lot of time. We work with a lot of businesses that early on, they're like, hey, we're going to make this ourselves. We're going to find somebody's restaurant that we can rent from them. We're going to find a shared kitchen. We'll build out a very small manufacturing facility in a strip mall somewhere, something very like small scale, just to get started, that we can get into the marketplace, that we can start selling product, we can start building the brand as we are looking for, or as we are growing to the point that we can meet the minimum of a particular co-packer. So don't be disappointed if you're not finding that co-packer right away. That is a fairly difficult relationship to find and build, and find the right, company that can help you out there. All right, I am going to real quick go through here. If they have already, Lisa, I'm looking at your question here. I would love Xander to ask participants who would want to go into stores if they have already tried selling direct to consumers, such as through a platform like Market Wagon, or through a farmer who already has base customers, or was going into the store the first outlet that they considered. So yeah, if you've got any input there on your own business journey, as far as your entrance into the marketplace, I'd be curious. Please, put down, like, were you going straight to stores? Were you already selling to consumers, maybe on a website, maybe through a farmer's market? I will say, as an entry point into the marketplace, farmers markets are excellent for most food products. You get a one-on-one interaction with your customers. So you're starting to build that brand. You're starting to get that customer feedback. You're starting to build that target market kind of demographic. You know who's buying your product, they're telling you what they like about it, and they're probably also telling you what other interests they have. That's all really valuable information. And farmers markets are relatively low barriers to entry to get started, to start selling product, start building that brand. So excellent. So yeah, Dennis is saying we started at farmers markets, still selling there, great for testing and revenue generation. So absolutely a great place to get started. Lisa had mentioned Market Wagon, which is kind of like a hybrid selling online farmers market program, another relatively low entry to barrier that might make sense to be that step before you get into stores. And we get to that step on the list. I'll talk a little bit more about that and why that strategy would likely make sense. And then Gavin is saying currently we are direct to consumer, also vendor pop-up shops. Pop-up shops are also becoming more prevalent in places that I didn't expect. I was talking to somebody, there was a plant shop downtown Kansas City, Missouri, that was doing vendor pop-ups for folks, for local businesses. What was it? There was a co-working space here in Independence that was also kind of doing like a mini farmers market vendor pop-up. Again, great opportunity to connect with customers and find out, where there's some synergy with other local businesses to help support each other. And then, get that information from your customers, have that one-on-one, interaction, start gathering that information, because you will lose that when you do grow to the point that your sales are through stores. You don't know who your end consumer is, directly necessarily. You're stocking the shelves at the store, or you're selling to the procure the regional distribution center for that chain of stores. So you're steps away from the person that is actually purchasing your product and enjoying it. So it takes more marketing effort, and it takes more data collection, and it takes a lot more to reconnect to the person who is actually spending money on your product. Take that opportunity early on to start gathering that information and start connecting with folks. It's basically it's marketing that pays you. So it makes a lot of sense for our folks to do those pop-ups, to do those farmers markets early on before jumping into wholesale accounts with either stores or restaurants. This is a great spot to make sure and kind of go through some of the comments. And then Megan, backstage, if you notice any that I am, any questions or anything through the comments that I'm missing, let me know, because I want to make sure that I go through there. And if nothing else, at the end of the program, I'm hanging around until all the questions are answered. So we'll definitely go through there. All right. Let's jump ahead. This is another handout. So again, if you don't have the handouts, make sure to comment and they can get those to you. But yes, the food label guide. It does link to where on the FDA website you can find the full information, like all the information that you would need to know about food labeling requirements. But it's a lot. So I put this guide together just to go over the essential basic components that just about every food product is going to have. And some of it's pretty straightforward. Like, you got to identify what company it is. You got to identify what the product is. So you'll see, this is a great example on this. This is a just add water hummus. So it says those words explicitly on the packaging, because just having the flavor on there doesn't describe what the product is. So if it's like on the chicken lasagna, most likely you will have whatever the brand name or whatever you have called that flavor, somewhere on there you're identifying, you're telling the customer, like, okay, what is it? It's chicken lasagna, using the common name of what that product would be. One that does get forgotten or not properly listed on there is the net weight in both the imperial and metric units. So you'll see that if you go on the store shelves when you're doing that market research and checking out what other indirect and direct competition that you have, you'll start noticing things on these labels and kind of where they're located, and you'll see net weight pretty much on the front, middle, bottom area on just about every food product. On the back is where we're starting to get into the meat of some of the information that needs to be on your product label. You notice most products do have their nutrition facts panel on them. The FDA does say that you're only required to have that nutrition facts panel when your company is selling $50,000 or more. But what we find a lot of times is when you talk to stores, even if you have not reached that $50,000 threshold, the store will say, we'd like to take your product, but can you get that nutrition facts panel on there, because our customers look at it, it's important to our customers, so it's important to us. So a lot of times we'll see food product manufacturers put that label on before they're legally required to, because maybe it's a health-oriented product and it's just important to have for your customers, or because a store you want to get into says, hey, you need to have this. The ingredients you'll always have to have listed from what there is the most of to what there's the least of. You'll have to have that basic company info on there. So website, probably a general email address, probably a city and state of your corporate headquarters. So you want to have that basic contact info. And another component that you will have to have is a best by date, and it serves a couple purposes. One is, well, it tells your customers when you are guaranteeing the freshness of your particular product. For a lot of things, your product doesn't expire. When we talk about like granola as an example, it doesn't expire. It just at some point gets less good. At some point, the flavor starts to dissipate. At some point, the texture fades, or otherwise, you as the manufacturer do not want to guarantee that it's in the state of freshness that you would otherwise want it to be in. It also serves as your batch lot system. Basically, that indicates on that product when you made it. So you as the manufacturer will have all the information of the ingredients that you've purchased. You'll have the information of the dates that you manufactured product, because you'll know if it's a year shelf life and it was made, or if it's got an expiration date of 7/13/21, well, you made it 7/13/2020. Those records are important for potential recall plans. And even for our small manufacturers, it is not completely uncommon that you might have a recall on a particular ingredient. So it's not that you had anything go wrong, but the source of that sugar or, that chicken or whatever it may be, where you got it from, they're like, hey, we got to recall that. Well, it needs to come down the supply chain to you, and you need to fulfill your duty as a manufacturer to then identify what products, what batch lots are affected, and then what stores do I need to go to, or what in my inventory do I need to dispose of, and then connect with those store managers and be able to tell them, hey, products with this best by date through this best by date, we just gotta remove them. Or maybe you're responsible for that and you need to go to those stores and remove those products. But that's something that the FDA is going to ask about. And then also important when we're talking about getting into stores, something that's not necessarily required is your barcode, unless a store that you're wanting to get into says, hey, we've got a point of sale system and you're going to have to get a barcode. There's a few different, lots of places that you can get barcodes through. One that we connect folks to is an organization called GS1. And that one we connect folks to because we just know with those barcodes, they're going to work wherever you're selling your product, whether that's on Amazon, on different stores, wherever you're selling that product, those barcodes will function. But you've got a lot of different resources for that. But if you're selling at the farmer's market, you are manually entering in that information. You got to plug it into your particular point of sale system. You don't need the barcode for that. But getting into those stores, if you get into the local Hy-Vees, you're going to have that barcode. All right, let's talk about your suppliers. So early on, and this is okay, you're probably going to the local grocery store or Costco, Sam's, maybe Restaurant Depot, and getting your ingredients and maybe your packaging, maybe you're printing off your own labels. That's where a lot of folks start. But eventually, that's financially probably not going to make sense. Eventually, you're going to go through some distributor, whether it's the U.S. Foods, Cisco, if you are, and maybe best case scenario, a lot of times is eventually you'll be buying your ingredients and maybe your packaging directly from the manufacturer. Typically, that's going to give you the best per unit price. But also, if you're buying your flour from the actual flour mill, they're going to have a pretty high minimum. Like they might just say, we sell in pallets of flour. That's it. So if you want to buy from us, you have to buy a pallet. If you want to buy less than that, you need to go through the distribution companies that we utilize. So again, maybe that is you're going through U.S. Foods for that while you're buying it per 50-pound bag. But once you get to the point that you're buying a pallet of 50-pound bags, then it likely makes sense to buy it straight from the manufacturer and get that price break on it. The other thing to consider with your sourcing is reliability. We've seen with some of our food manufacturers that they found a really good price on, glass jars through a particular distributor. But although they got a great per unit price, that particular distributor was late with deliveries or would deliver with a number of just broken glass jars, or the lids weren't the right lids to the jars. So at the end of the day, it was not worth the discount because of all the disruption that it caused to that particular business, that you're now having to spend time resourcing or retrying to get those particular jars, because you need to be able to fulfill the stores that you're in. You need to be able to be ready for the farmer's market that you're going to. So in addition to price, also looking at the reliability. And speaking to reliability, one thing that I recommend for all of our food manufacturers, of all those key things, so if you've got your particular blister pouches that you're putting that granola in, I would at least have a plan B, if not a plan C and D, on who else can I get those blister pouches from, should there be an issue with the company that I'm using now. Because we see this a lot. We see this a lot right now. You hear it in the news, like they're just supply chain issues on things that are, just not coming in. We've got manufacturers, who are saying, hey, the people that I normally get my containers through are saying that my next order is going to come in November. That's not helpful. You have to have those. You have to have the containers to be able to sell the product. That completely shuts you down. So thinking through and having a plan ahead of time before it becomes a crisis. If they say, well, we can't get you your packaging until November, you say, okay, thanks. And then you pick up the phone and you've already got the list of, XYZ company number 2 or 3 that you've already looked through, that you've got that backup plan for. And sometimes, too, we see ingredient manufacturers, that flour mill, my hypothetical flour mill, maybe they just close up shop. You don't want to have your business completely and utterly contingent on the existence of one other, ingredient supplier. So what are the other plans? Maybe it's you've got a contingency where you can buy your own small flour mill and mill it yourself. Maybe there is another supplier. Maybe you've got other options on where you can source that, but have those ahead of time so when it does happen, and it will happen for all of our food manufacturers, at some point you'll have one component of your overall product and there'll be some sort of supply issue. All right, Dennis has a question. Do you have a resource list of ingredient producers? We're finding it difficult to broaden our sources for certain ingredients. If it was just food product ingredient manufacturers and distribution companies, that would be a giant list. Probably the best resources, like I was saying before, like Mid-Continent Public Library that subscribes to those industry reports. That's probably going to be the most comprehensive source to find particular ingredient producers, and then you can narrow it down, I believe. And then Kelly Head with Mid-Continent would be the person to chat with on how you can search those databases, and maybe you can say, I want to narrow it down by mills because I'm looking for, flours or milled ingredients, or maybe you can narrow it down specifically to oats. Just depending on what it is that you are looking for, those industry databases might be the best resource for the most potentially comprehensive. Dennis, what we might do is we'll send you some contact information for Kelly at the library, and then he can go over the different databases that they've got access to, and help kind of navigate through that process. But yeah, again, those industry reports might be the most comprehensive resource of different companies that exist that might manufacture the ingredients or distribute the particular ingredients that you're looking for. But we also do find, especially with like novel products or health-oriented products, maybe one of the like on your SWOT analysis, maybe one of those external threats is that particular sugar substitute that you use. There's one manufacturer. That's their trade secret that they manufacture, and then that's just something for you to consider with your business plan, and maybe how you mitigate that risk, because you know there's only one person making this specific type of ingredient that is essential to your product. So sometimes that's just the nature of business, but you don't want to be blindsided by it either. If that is a particular just weakness of the business, be aware of it and maybe have contingency plans if possible. But you don't want to find that out. And we've had that with businesses where they're like, hey, this particular rare legume that somebody, ground up for us, they are out of business and I don't know where to find this rare legume. At least be aware of the rarity of that product ahead of time. And it gives you a chance to maybe keep an eye out of other potential manufacturers, or maybe then you go to another, it's the almond company that makes almond flour, and you're like, hey, have you heard of this XYZ rare legume? Are you able to, what would be your minimum if you were able to source that for us and process it the way that we need it processed? So all considerations to think about, but ideally there's some other options that you can just have queued up. All right, services. One of the very first services that almost all of our businesses is they're going to contract out: accounting and tax. And that's not all necessarily the same person. So this is just like we were talking about insurance agents. Have a conversation with your financial service providers on what services that they will provide. So if you've connected with a bookkeeper, that bookkeeper is not necessarily a tax expert. So when it comes tax time, or you're wondering why your sales tax that you've been collecting has not been remitted to the particular states it needs to be remitted to, they're like, well, hey, I'm just keeping the books. I'm not the tax person. So as you are connecting with CPAs or accountants or bookkeepers or tax professionals, understand that those are potentially different categories of service. And sometimes there are, full service, maybe it's a, contract CFO. That service is going to take care of, everything and work with you on strategic planning with your finances. That'd be awesome. But make sure that you're connecting with the service that your particular business needs. And unless taxes or accounting is your background, most of the time it makes sense early on to contract that out, because what it takes you a full weekend to do might just be an hour or two that you're paying that accountant, and it makes sense for you to be doing what you are good at, which is making product and selling stores and running those events and making sales that you'll be making up more revenue than what you're spending on contracting out those particular services, or maybe maintenance of your website, or maybe certain marketing efforts. So definitely be thinking about because as a small business, limited funds, in an already capital intensive business on the essentials and the equipment and everything that you got to get to even make a product to put it on the store shelf, there's only so much time. And then another thing that has always been difficult that is only more difficult right now is finding employees. So you really need to be thinking how you can be very efficient with your time, because it becomes very easy as the president and CEO wearing all the hats to get bogged down by all the tasks that need to be done, that you're not using your time efficiently. Your limited hours that you have in the day, you want to be doing what is moving that company forward, either automating or contracting out those services that make sense for somebody else to be doing. You can't do it all. And we see a lot of our entrepreneurs who are very headstrong, and they're like, no, I can do all the things. And then after a while, they're like, yeah, it doesn't make sense for me to try to do all the things. So be thinking about that as that business is growing, and at what point does it make sense to pay for a service to help take over that part of the business, or to hire somebody to take over those responsibilities so you can focus on growing that business, making more revenue, and doing what you're good at. All right, this is it. This is the part of the whole program that we were trying to get to, is actually getting into the store. So one of the first steps there is figuring out, who do you talk to? Who makes the decision on whether or not you get to go in this store? And it's different for every store. Sometimes it can be a store manager. It could sometimes be a department manager within the store. Sometimes it's a regional procurement person that you have to talk to. So typically the stores that have the autonomy, mom and pop stores, locally owned stores, a lot of the Hy-Vees, a lot of the, some of the Sunfreshes have the autonomy to make those decisions per store. Those are typically, for a startup business, a little bit easier to break into, as opposed to grocery chains that might have a more corporate structure. So I think a good example, if you were going to the other side of the state in the St. Louis area, if you're looking at like Schnucks grocery stores, typically what we've seen with our businesses is that it is a more traditionally corporate. You're talking to a regional person, and you're going to be supplying X amount of stores within that region to get started. That is tough for a early stage bootstrapping startup business. So making that leap from, I'm doing these farmers markets and pop-ups, I want to start getting into stores, maybe it's those small specialty stores that you're getting started with first, that you can build up to be able to meet an order from a larger grocery chain that's going to be wanting, a few pallets at a time. And maybe, for, some of those larger stores might say, hey, you got to give us some free product, and you got to do sampling. So there's these other costs to entry for some of the larger chains, but each store is different. So first step, figuring out, hey, who is the person that I need to talk to who makes that call? And then the other thing, before you go in there, go into the store and start talking with that decision maker, is you want to be completely prepared. This kind of it sounds like common sense, but making sure that you've got a professional presentation of your product. If you're providing samples, they're refrigerated, things are refrigerated. You've got some way of safely presenting those samples to that decision maker. And then paperwork also. One of the handouts, I believe, is an example of a sell sheet that just has the information that would be important to that decision maker. So you've got your UPC codes and your product dimensions. That's important. Where and how it can or cannot fit into the real estate space, the shelf space of that store. That's going to be important. You would have, either on the sell sheet or on an order form, you would have your wholesale price and the case number, what comes in a case, the unit cost, you would have the recommended retail price per unit, all that information that would be important to that person that you want to leave them with. Another thing that is important for a small startup local food manufacturer is your ability to demonstrate to that decision maker that you will be reliable. A lot of grocery stores, and pretty much all the grocery stores that you'll be wanting to get into, they want you. They want your product. They want local products because their customers want local products. So they're like really excited to have local options. But historically, a lot of those managers have gotten burned by small startups that have either not been reliable, have not had, maybe they didn't have that plan B option for particular packaging or ingredients, and they weren't able to fulfill and keep the shelves stocked, or they just went out of business, as happens with startup businesses. That becomes a difficulty for that store manager, department manager, when they have to, real quick, fill that spot on the shelf with something else. So one of their biggest concerns that they demonstrate is that, will this company be reliable? Will you be here next year, and the following year? Will you keep the shelves stocked? Something that is very important for you is to, make sure that you're able to fulfill those orders, or maybe you'll be responsible. This is another thing that you would, if they are interested in your product and they say, hey, we want to come on board, something that you would either propose or negotiate is, are you providing the full service? Are your people going into the store and stocking it and making sure that there's enough product, that it's not past its expiration date, that it's presentable and fully stocked? Are you simply delivering it to a receiving dock and the employees of that store are they? But either way, you have to have product there. If that shelf space is empty, it will get filled. And we have found that it is more difficult to get back into a store that you had and then you were not able to fulfill and you lost that particular store. It's harder to get back into it than it was to get into that store in the first place. So you really want to make sure that you have all of those ducks in a row. And we had talked about this earlier. When you do go have that conversation, make sure that you're ready to take an order. If they say, love it, like it, all right, bring it in. When can you have it? You want to be able to say, today or so soon. You want to be able to fulfill that order. There's a couple reasons. One of the primary ones is there's a bit of turnover in grocery store management. The people are moving around, and it may be like if you're talking to somebody months before you're even able to make and take that order, it may be just a completely different person in that position. So it did you no good to talk with person A because they're no longer there. You have to restart the whole conversation and convince somebody new that they should take on your product. So again, most of the time, if a store manager, if a decision maker is interested, they will make that call pretty quickly, and they'll want you to be able to take that order. We've had other businesses that have approached retailers early on in the concept phase. Typically, it doesn't do you any, maybe you can get some feedback from them in the concept stage, but it doesn't go to any, increased chance of getting into the store. What you really want to do is just be ready to take advantage of their excitement right there, and get into that particular establishment. And then also, consider the schedule of that decision maker. It's not uncommon that you would go to, say the Hy-Vee and say, hey, who makes the decision on this? when will they be in and when would they be most available, and kind of figure that out and then come back at that particular time. One thing that folks think like, oh, I'll leave these samples in my information with the person at the help desk. I mean, maybe it gets to that decision maker, but probably not. I'll be honest, it probably does not. It probably goes home with the folks at the like service desk or whoever's working there. So you want to make sure that you are speaking with the person or meeting with the person that actually makes that decision. And then if everything works out and they're like, this sounds great, that's when you would, you potentially you are then you might be guaranteeing your product, so you might be just taking back the product that doesn't sell, or it might just be a non-guaranteed, you're just selling the product by the case, and then it's up to that store to either discount it before it gets to the expiration date or toss it. What we see with a lot of our startup businesses, kind of to make it less risky for the store, they'll guarantee it. They'll say, hey, we'll buy back the product, or it could be even a consignment type situation where you're getting paid as product sells from that particular vendor. The details of that you might want to be considering ahead of time as part of that decision. Well, so that was getting into the store, but now it's like literally getting into the store. So we're talking about the logistics. Actually, the store manager said, yes, we love this product. We'd like to have it in the store. Can you have it in next week? We'll have the spot ready for you. Now you got to start thinking through your supply chain of getting from your manufacturing facility or your co-packer to that particular store. So how are you doing that safely? We talked about this. Probably starting off while you are only in a couple stores, you're probably doing it yourself. And you're probably offering full service. That means you're going in there and you're stocking the shelf and you're making sure the expired product gets taken down, and it's just you driving around to those particular stores. Like we talked about way back in the beginning of the class, you should be factoring in that cost of you, even though you're not paying yourself right now, eventually, unless you just really enjoy driving around to grocery stores and stocking shelves, you're probably not doing that yourself. You're paying somebody. Possibly it's a distribution company that specializes in distributing local food products, or maybe you are paying an employee and you are purchasing a vehicle to do that delivery. Either way, before you start actually having to pay out of pocket those services, factor that in. And then, just thinking through the safety and quality control. If your product needs to be refrigerated, it needs to be delivered and maintain temperature throughout the driving to the different stores. So be thinking of how you do that. It's not, if you've got a cold product, it's not necessarily that you have to have a refrigerated truck, but you do need to have containers that will sufficiently hold that product frozen or cold through the length of their travel to that store. Though some stores might say, we've got a requirement that it has to be a commercial vehicle that delivers product to the store. So that's another consideration for certain retail stores, that they might say, it doesn't work, but some stores, as long as it's being delivered right temperature, safely, it can be just a personal vehicle that you're using to transport those products. That's very common with some of our businesses. And like we had talked about, it eventually might make sense to just contract that part of the business out to a distribution company. But maybe, again, that's not right off the bat. maybe you're just getting into those first few stores, but as you are starting to get into maybe a couple dozen stores, you're like, whew, this is a lot of driving. Maybe I need to factor in and have some pricing. Ideally, maybe you had this conversation earlier on and kind of figure out what percent margin per product, how is the pricing for distribution for my product, and you've got that factored in, that when it makes sense to pull the trigger, you can go call up, hey, distribution company, I need you now to take this over. How can we get started? So these are all different considerations for the literal part of actually getting that product into the stores and making sure that you have a system for managing what you are responsible for managing. All right, this is a good kind of transition point that I'm going to look through and make sure. And Lisa's talking about getting a membership to the Specialty Food Association. That's not a terribly large cost, so that's an option as well. And access to the list of, we were talking about ingredient suppliers, distributors, CoPackers, all of these folks that we are talking about. So that is a great recommendation. Thank you. All right, let's talk about marketing. What is your marketing strategy? Oh, there we go. Actually, no, I'm not going to ask that question. I don't like that question, and there's a reason why. When I ask folks, what is your marketing strategy? Unless you have experience with marketing, I get a variety of answers that are not helpful. So I want to ask more targeted, specific questions to really break down what is marketing, what should be a marketing strategy, what things within that question should you be asking to really get the most out of and really have the strategic part of marketing. So the first thing is thinking about who is your brand. And no, I did not typo there. I like asking it that way because it makes sense to think about your company and your product's brand as a person. And without getting like way crazy, like psychological, neurological, I'll just say that there have been a number of studies that suggest that when we engage with a particular brand, we are engaging with it, at least mentally, like we would with other people. We like businesses that we think of as friends or people that we like and trust. So it is beneficial for you as the business owner to think of your brand like a personified version of your brand. Like when you're posting on Facebook, when you're putting out promotional material or an advertisement, think about who your brand is and how they would talk and build that in a way that connects with the folks that you know are your target market, that you know are buying your product. You see this like very explicitly with some like large international brands. Like Coca-Cola is probably the best example. Like they literally put people's names on the Coca-Cola bottle, and you're like, that's kind of weird, but it like really directly makes that connection that when you see the Joshua bottle, you're like snapping a picture and you're like, Joshua, it's you. But it engages that part of your mind that activates when you think about your friends that you really like, when you see their name on the Coca-Cola bottle and you think of that Coca-Cola as family and friends now. Another great example of Coca-Cola is they, like every year, and a lot of major brands do this, around the holidays, they play the same commercial from like 20 years ago. And you think, oh my gosh, Coca-Cola, you can like come up with a new polar bear like Coca-Cola commercial. You've got the budget to do it. But again, seeing that same exact commercial re-triggers all the warm fuzzies that you feel around the holidays with family and friends. So those are some really explicit examples of humanizing that brand, because that's what really connects with customers, even as a small business. I encourage you to think that same way, because it's exactly how your customers on a kind of deep mental level are connecting with the brands that they know and like. In a lot of cases, if they know the owner, if they know you, they're making that connection very explicitly to you. That may or may not be what you want. You may have a brand that is explicitly named after you and connected to you personally. There are advantages and disadvantages to doing that. Or it's its own brand, personality, persona, personification. So as you're developing that brand and how your company communicates, be thinking about who your brand is. I also like to ask how you are engaging with customers. Sometimes folks will say, I am engaging with my customers on Facebook. Okay, there needs to be a little bit more to that, because you're not really engaging with customers if all you're doing on Facebook is listing new products, listing, I'm in this store now, or I am launching this product, or I am offering this deal. You're just kind of putting out information, which is useful to an extent, but it's really not using social media to its fullest advantage for your business. The advantage is, we were talking about this when we were talking about farmers markets and personally engaging with customers. Well, social media is a great platform to do that, to have a back and forth, to have actual engagement with and questions, or they're participating in maybe a competition, or you're just asking them, some question about what'd you do on the 4th of July? And you think that's, what can I do with that information? But actually, kind of getting a psychographic report on what other things your target customers are interested in can be useful for you in making other marketing decisions on, maybe you're doing a cross promotion with your customers like granola and they like surfboarding. I don't know if there's other things that fit that target market. That's useful information for you. And you're engaging with folks. They're actively doing things with you, with the brand, and fostering that brand loyalty, and they're becoming friends with the business, that they're having those connections. So you can absolutely go on Facebook, put out that information. There is some value to that you are using it as that kind of bullhorn to put that information out there. But I would say there is more you can get out of your social media time and money to really engage and build customer loyalty and get information about your customers and what they're interested in, what they like about your product. Maybe what they don't like about your product. That's also useful information. So building a strategy around how you're engaging with customers as opposed to just putting out posts and information. Another question I like to ask is, what are your measurable goals with your marketing efforts? Like, what are you trying to achieve? Maybe, pick some specific things that you want to achieve with your marketing efforts for the next season or the next year or the next month, whatever time frame that you're looking at for maybe a marketing campaign. Maybe it's, we specifically want to get new customers. We specifically want to engage our existing customers we want repeat sales. Maybe we want to build up our Amazon store that we just launched. So we want to build a marketing strategy around making sure that we're getting folks at least engaged and reviewing and building up that profile. Maybe we just want to get folks to engage with us on social media. So we're going to specifically be doing things around that. Pick a thing that is measurable. And the reason you do that, well, is later on, you're going to measure it. And whatever your marketing efforts are, whatever you're spending money on, whatever you're spending time on, whatever you're having your employees work on, you want to be able to go back after the fact and say, those things were worth doing. And here is why. Because I have measured these particular metrics and they have increased while we did these things. One of the other handouts that you should have is this handy dandy marketing sheet. It goes over, we got some definitions over here. And then I also have some diagrams on, and these are things that I'll go over with folks typically. Very visual, so I have to draw these things out. But one is kind of a flow chart for a marketing campaign. So figuring out what that goal is, setting an objective, and it's really kind of, I say it's kind of like back when you're in school doing the scientific method. You've got a hypothesis, and then you set up an experiment and you measure it and you test that hypothesis. But in this case, your hypothesis is a particular objective that you're saying, if I do these things, I will get these results. If I run this ad campaign around gift giving in my product, I think my product will make a great Father's Day, Mother's Day. What's a holiday there's a little gap in holidays? But maybe we're thinking this is not too early for food manufacturers to be thinking about like Christmas, winter holidays, Thanksgiving. So, developing a campaign on what are some holiday recipes that you can use granola in, or something. But anyway, you're saying if I do these things, and then I'm going to get more repeat customers, or I'm going to see a huge, increase in interactions online with my customers, and I'm just the goal is to stay top of mind through the holidays because there's so much going on. You want to make sure that your brand is still engaged with your customers, that they're thinking about it and they're like, oh yeah, I need to make sure that I'm picking up these things, or maybe I need to make sure that I share this with my family as they're all coming into town because this is my favorite lasagna, that I want to make sure that my family coming in here is introduced to that. But thinking through and then coming up with a strategy and what you're going to do on a regular basis, kind of like your daily tasks through that marketing campaign, and then going back after the holidays when you're hanging around after the new year and you've got a little bit of time, going back and seeing, was that successful? And ideally, hopefully it was. You go back and you measured that we had twice as many interactions with folks on our social media platforms. We had a sales bump by doing these things, or whatever else it is that you're measuring, and you can say, this is worth doing. Let's do it again around the holidays next year. Or maybe you go back and you're like, hey, I spent a lot of time on these posts and getting engagement, but we really didn't have any measurable increases that benefited us. That is still useful information because next holiday season for another marketing campaign, you probably want to go back to the drawing board. But what a lot of folks do with marketing is they just kind of throw the spaghetti at the wall. And, they don't really, measure. They're just throwing things out there, or they're doing multiple different marketing strategies at one time. And maybe you see an increase in sales or engagement or new customers. But even then, you don't know which thing did it. So that's why I like that kind of scientific experiment for a marketing campaign, because then you know that you are getting a return on your investment of whether you're paying for advertisement or you're just spending time doing these things, that you're not just spinning your wheels on things that aren't that effective. So just like everything else in business, there needs to be a return on that investment. The best way to do is set it up, that experiment, and measure it and go back and say, yep, that worked, or nope, let's go back to the drawing board. And the last step is look into the future, scaling up, growing your business. Something that I've kind of alluded to throughout the class is that there's a lot of benefit to just talking with other food manufacturers, whether you see them at the farmer's market or those other pop-up events or if it's through business associations, they are going to help in those connections. Maybe you're going to find your co-packer that way. We had mentioned the Specialty Foods Association, one of those business associations that you directly engage with other businesses that can help you. Maybe you're going to find that supplier that you were looking for, that, maybe you weren't able to Google them, but somebody else is like, oh yeah, I found this guy way out in Idaho who makes this product also. There's a lot of serendipitous collisions that we see with our food manufacturers just by talking and getting out there in the business community. Also, plan ahead. So probably early on, you are filling those bags of granola just by hand. You've got the big mixer and you're scooping them and you're putting them in the bags. That is not scalable. It makes sense early on because that's what you got. But you want to know before you need it, what is the weigh fill machine that I'm going to want? What's going to make sense for my product? That's going to be able to fill it efficiently. And then kind of do a cost analysis on that. That's going to be a big capital investment. So at what point does it make sense? Because you're paying somebody to fill that product by hand, an hourly rate. You're paying for that particular facility. If you're sharing a restaurant or you've got limited hours that you can utilize it, if it's a shared space, you're probably paying by the hour. At what point does it make more sense to go ahead and drop a few $1,000s on a piece of equipment that's going to allow you to produce twice as much or 4 times as much product in the same amount of time? Do that cost analysis early on so you know what is the precise moment of how many units will I be distributing where it makes sense, or how many hours am I using in this particular kitchen before it makes sense that I need to buy this piece of equipment. So it's just more efficient for your bottom line, for your time and financially, to know that ahead of time, to have that equipment. Because what you don't want to do is you got to the point that you're reaching the capacity of your employees or the space that you're using. And you're like, oh my gosh, I got to go do something. I got to go figure out what kind of equipment I can buy. I got to go figure these things out right now. It's much more efficient to have that already kind of ready, to kind of know, to be measuring, and you're like, all right, we're getting close to that time. It's time to invest in that piece of equipment that we were researching. Same with when we were kind of talking about your suppliers, kind of figuring out, maybe you are buying your products from, US Foods. Maybe you're going to Restaurant Depot. For some of those products, it may make sense that you buy them directly from the person manufacturing them. So again, knowing ahead of time, what's that minimum? What does that do to my cost? And to be able to forecast and plan for that ahead of time and make that call when it financially makes the most sense. Also, we talked about co-packers. We had talked about distribution companies. Maybe you're hiring on one we didn't talk about is brokers or salespeople for your product. Maybe it makes sense, if that's not your thing, maybe it makes sense to pay somebody to be going to the grocery stores or connecting with the local, whoever is the procurement person, pay somebody to do that. So kind of figuring out who those options might be, again, ahead of time. So again, all right, now's the time to hire that salesperson because it's going to make more financial sense for me to be doing other things. And the other thing that I'm going to leave you with is there are tons of resources and folks. I mean, the first one is Mid-Con Public Library. We already mentioned some of their services. You're already here tonight for this class. And there are other classes. There are other classes for food product manufacturing. So keep an eye out for those. Those are all free and accessible to you. But there are also one organization that I definitely want to mention is KC SourceLink. They aggregate all of the different business resources in the Kansas City metro area. So you can go to their website, you can call up their number and say, hey, I need help with marketing. Hey, I'm looking, maybe you're growing to the point, maybe you are looking for a potentially investment. If you've grown the company to a large enough size that maybe it makes sense to be able to procure the large equipment or facility or whatever it is, or if you're needing, experienced business coaches through different organizations. KC SourceLink aggregates it all. So they are a great place to start. And I put my contact info on there too. So if there are questions, if I log out of here and you're like, oh, shoot, I should have asked Xander this question, shoot me an email. Happy to help out. I've had folks that will email me and they're like, hey, Xander, I took your class like 5 years ago. And now I've got some questions. I'm thinking of either getting started or doing, pivoting or launching a new product. I had a question on this. So always happy to take those questions and help out. The other thing, I want to make sure you will get that survey. Please, oh, there it is. Please fill out that survey. That's what allows Mid-Continent Public Library to get the funding to put on these fantastic programs. And then I also use that information to modify what I talk about in my classes. So if you're like, hey, Xander talked about this too much. I didn't need this information. What I really needed was this information. That helps inform me on what I should be teaching folks, or maybe even what other classes that the library will consider. So please do fill out that survey. Thank you, Mid-Continent. Megan, for hosting. Thank you, audience, for joining me this evening. Have a great rest of this evening. And like I said, if you've got any other questions, the Mid-Continent Square One team is available. I'm available. Just let us know.